Welcome back to another MOTOBOB video, and today we've got hold of some spy shots that look to be a brand new small capacity retro from none other than Moto Guzzi. Now if this bike makes it to production, it'd be a big departure from the larger capacity bikes currently in their lineup, with the smallest Moto Guzzis available at the moment I think being their V7, V9 and V85 TT at 850ccs. A smaller bike like this suggests that they're looking to cash in on the learner-friendly customer base, but also maybe sell some more bikes out in Asia where smaller capacity machines make up more of the market. So that raises the question, is this just a half-baked, cynical way to make money, or is it a proper Moto Guzzi? Well, in this video, we'll go through everything that we know about it so far to find out. Straight off the bat, we can see that this is pretty much the same engine as Aprilia's recently announced RS457 mid-capacity sports bike, with pretty much the exact same engine casings and proportions. That should mean it's a parallel twin around the 457cc mark, of course, and I'd expect the performance output to be pretty much the same as well at 47 horsepower peak, because that means it'll qualify to be sold to A2 license holders. Now, quite often on retro bikes, you get a slightly different tune to their more sporty equivalents, and so perhaps there will be a little bit more focus on mid-range and torque, but really, with such a hard limit on top-end power, there isn't a great deal of room for maneuvering, so it's not going to be wildly different. The thing that is very nice about this engine, though, is the fact that it gets a 270-degree crank, which means more of that V-twin-esque sound and feel than the 180 cranks that you'll often find on twin-cylinder bikes at this end of the market, like the Kawasaki Z500 or the Honda CB500 Hornet. Now look, it might sound a little bit unusual to the uninitiated to have an Aprilia engine in a Moto Guzzi, but keep in mind that both Aprilia and Moto Guzzi are owned by the Piaggio Group. It's absolutely not uncommon for motorcycle manufacturers to repurpose platforms and engines across multiple genres of motorcycle just to make the most of the R&D investment that's gone into each new engine and technical platform. What I will say though is I don't really recall Moto Guzzi having a long history of making 270-degree parallel twins. They're absolutely best known for their transverse V-twins. In fact, you could say they're positively famous for it. And so this bike doesn't really feel like a thoroughbred Guzzi, and there's got to be a little bit of just cashing in on an efficiency. Small capacity retro bikes can sell in big volumes, as proven by the Royal Enfield 350 lineup, for example. And of course, other manufacturers are looking to get in on the act with stuff like Triumph's new Speed 400 and Scrambler 400X. So as a business move, you can absolutely see why Piaggio Group want to get in on this market. And while they do have the perfect engine with this little 457, I would say a retro bike doesn't really fit in with the Aprilia brand, which is much more sporty and performance biased. So in that way, you can see why they've gone with the sort of Moto Guzzi vibe, but really it just feels like the engine and technical side of an Aprilia wrapped up in some Moto Guzzi styling cues. Specifically, the top half of the bike has a lot of stuff that you'd expect to find on a V7, for example, with the round headlight that's very typical of a retro naked. And moving back from there, you've got the fairly large looking elongated fuel tank with the really defined lines along the bottom there that you'd guess would be a Moto Guzzi even if it wasn't branded up. Then you've got the brown leather saddle, which is a really common retro bike move, and it's finished off right at the back end with the twin taillights that you'll see across a bunch of Moto Guzzi bikes like the V85 TT, the V100 Mandello and the V100 Stelvio. It's just not entirely cohesive though, is it? Certainly from a visual perspective, because the bottom of the bike is almost entirely modern looking with a liquid cooled engine and the bling looking gold forks. You can also see a little bit of TFT display mounted on a makeshift bracket that doesn't exactly transport you back to the 70s. And while I would expect it to look a little bit better once it's properly finished up and painted, and once they've neatened up some of these makeshift parts, there's still a long way to go to make it worthy of the Moto Guzzi name, which produces, in my opinion, some of the best looking retro bikes like the V7. Looking at the components on this bike, it appears to get 17-inch cast wheels front and rear, which look to be lifted straight off the RS457, and they're shod with sporty looking road tyres that admittedly should give it decent handling, but normally on a Moto Guzzi retro you'd find a slightly larger front wheel for a bit more of that old school stance. Brakes are from Bibre, which is the budget sub-brand of Brembo, and you get a 4-piston radially mounted caliper up front, again same as the RS457, and it looks like the same disc too. And then at the rear, you've got a vibrate brake as well. Then, yes, those gold anodized forks, which really do stick out, and they look like they'll get a bit of adjustability perhaps, but certainly they prioritize sporty functionality over like charming historical aesthetics. Now, to be fair to them, one of the things that they have significantly changed is the frame, which I believe is aluminium on the RS457. Whereas this bike gets a steel trellis, which is a bit more fitting for the retro genre. It also looks like the swing arm is new as well, and I guess that's primarily to accommodate this rather unusual rear shock solution. You see, if you look at both sides of the bike, you'll realize there's actually only one shock and it's just mounted off to one side on the right. It's pretty much in the position that you'd actually expect to find a pair of twin shocks, and so it does seem like a design feature that's been made to try and give the impression of a slightly old school bike with twin shocks, but perhaps with more similar functionality to a modern day monoshock. All in all, this one looks like it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag for me. It definitely doesn't have that Moto Guzzi styling through and through, and I think that's because what makes a Moto Guzzi look like a Moto Guzzi is the fundamentals. The transverse V-twin out through a shaft drive at the rear is a super distinctive look that makes up a large proportion of the bike, but ultimately it's a result of its technical foundations. The technical foundations of this bike, well, they're completely different to what you'd normally see on a Moto Guzzi, and so you've got the question as to why they've gone down that route. You could see it, as I've already said, to simply cash in on an existing platform and build a bike for the small capacity retro market with as little investment as possible, or if you're being more generous, you might say it's in the pursuit of making something that actually rides and handles pretty well with that 270 parallel twin, modern looking suspension and brakes, and the 17-inch wheels front and rear, which should make it feel more flickable than a more retro alternative. I think I'll have to reserve judgment until the final production version hits the market and we can see what they've really done with the final styling. But in the meantime, I'd love to know what you think of it, so do let me know down in the comments below. This bike, I think, will go directly head to head with the new Triumph 400s that I mentioned earlier. And so if you want to see my full walk around of those two bikes, I'll put it on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch. Hit subscribe as well if you've not already to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.